Some mysteries aren't solved with clues, but with a shotgun. Old Dunling, year 931 of the Inverwig calendar. The city had fallen into a dark slumber. In the night sky, colossal epaulettes drifted slowly like great whales, their cyclopean searchlights casting beams that swept across the sleeping metropolis. Lorenzo stood on a street corner, a cigarette dangling from his lips, breathing out clouds of smoke. The tobacco was laced with invigorating herbs that kept his mind sharp, even excited in the dead of night. Carried by this faint thrill, he tapped his cane lightly against the ground, striking out a brisk rhythm from memory. He was waiting for someone. He usually liked to spend his waiting time thinking about anything at all, as long as his brain wasn't idle. He lifted his head, gazing at the dim street lamp, and his thoughts began to drift. According to the concept of parallel universes, on a grand enough scale, anything incredible can happen. Or rather, under this concept, these things are destined to happen. For instance, in some world, the speed of light can be surpassed. Saturn's rings are a giant donut. Tesla is a grand magus who commands lightning. Hawking is a bronze dragon who controls time. And King Arthur is, in fact, a girl. So you see, anything is possible. Take another example in a world nearing the modern age, humanity ignited the first industrial revolution. Roaring steam engines powered massive iron contraptions. Railways spread to every inhabited corner of the land. Productivity was unleashed, and the economy soared. A perfect Terra arriving on billowing clouds of steam. At least that's how the story should have gone. But just like the concept of parallel universes, there are always things that defy common sense. What if the advent of the electrical age was postponed? Like the countless what-ifs in any story. What if the historical timeline everyone was familiar with deviated just slightly? The second industrial revolution did eventually begin, but confounding lie. The world did not enter the age of electricity. It was as if just as the most crucial apple in the history of physics was about to fall on Newton's head as he lay under a tree, the poor lad rolled over, and humanity briefly lost the law of universal gravitation. This world was the same. The moment they realized boiling water could drive all things, this and there veered off the normal course of history. Electrical technology failed to dominate the torrent of steam. It was never utilized on a large scale, existing only in a few isolated places. The internal combustion engine, with its far superior thermal efficiency, was never discovered. Larger and larger steam engines were built. They grew ever more complex, eventually becoming the hubs of cities, the hubs of the world. They were bloated, massive, and inefficient, yet when their magnificent iron forms appeared in sight, all were filled with awe. Lorenzo lived in such an age where reason and madness coexisted. Iron and steam, mystery and the unknown. A sharp whistle of steam cut through his thoughts. He looked to the side, where scorching white vapor erupted from a manhole cover on the street. It condensed into countless water droplets in the cold night wind before dispersing into a gray fog that blanketed the entire city. This was a hellish age, and this was a hellish city. The lunatics from the Mechanicum had hollowed out the city's underground, building the largest steam engine in history. To do so, they had dug underground channels, several kilometers long, to divert the River Thames into its iron furnace, which burned day and night to power the city's factories. The complex subterranean system served as its exhaust. Every day, thousands of tons of water vapor, purified and recycled, surged onto the streets only to fall back as a ceaseless, dreary drizzle. And so, this place was perpetually gloomy, never seeing the sun. He glanced down at his pocket watch. It was about time. Just then, the sound of hurried breathing and running footsteps echoed from the end of the street. It seemed the person he was waiting for was punctual. Lorenzo dropped his cigarette but reached under his heavy greatcoat and drew out his beloved Winchester. Just as the parallel universe concept suggests, in this godforsaken era, there was also a man hailed as a great detective. The great detective was a self-proclaimed title. He was no celebrated figure, nor was he a master of deduction. He was merely a second-rate detective who preferred to coerce suspects with force. Those who knew him called him Lorenzo Holmes. The footsteps grew closer, right beside him now. His face lit up with a manic glee. "Welcome to Old Dunling, my friend." The second-rate detective burst out from the street corner, laughing heartily at the approaching figure. Then, before the shadow's astonished eyes, he cordially pulled the trigger. The Winchester let out a deafening roar in the night. In the dazzling muzzle flash, the shadow had no time to react before being knocked to the ground, scarlet blood flowing through the cracks in the cobblestones and into the sewer. As the gunshot faded, patrolling constables armed with rifles soon surrounded the area. The searchlights from the Zeppel in above illuminated the scene as bright as day, but now apart from the already cold corpse, there was nothing left. The second-rate detective, Lorenzo Holmes, arrived in Old Dunling 6 years ago, currently makes a living as a private detective in the city of iron and steam. Another man, Ed. That was the topic of conversation this morning. According to the Queen's Daily, a man had been shot and killed at the border of the East End's Irons district in the inner city. Due to the proximity to the affluent inner city, the constables had been dispatched swiftly, but just like many times before, they found nothing. The autopsy from Sue Allen Hall revealed that the man was hit at close range by a shotgun. The scattered pellets had mangled the front of his body, making his face unrecognizable. However, based on his sun-darkened skin and a faint smell of fish, Sue Allen Hall deduced he was a sailor. They couldn't figure out why the sailor was there that day. The area was a great distance from the harbor. He had no reason to be there. Another cold case, at least in the public's eyes. No one was surprised by this outcome, nor was there any panic. After all, people had long since grown accustomed to it. This was Old Dunling G, the heart of Inverwig, the heart of the world. The first steam engine in human history was born here. Consequently, countless outsiders flocked to the city every day. Some for wealth, some for knowledge, some for power. The excessive influx of people led to a decline in public order. To maintain control, Old Dunling G was divided into 4 districts, one encircling the next. At the very center was the seat of power for all of Inverwig, where Queen Victoria's Platinum Palace stood. It was also garrisoned by the Royal 3rd Mobile Corps. Surrounding this was the inner city, home to Old Dunling G's wealthy and noble, who enjoyed 20-for-minus protection from the constables. Beyond that was the outer city, divided into 4 smaller areas where most of the residents lived. It was the largest part of Old Dunling G. And finally, there was the undercity. Access to Old Dunling G's districts was granted based on one's papers. If you were dressed in rags, you couldn't even enter the outer city and could only loiter in the undercity. And the undercity, in a sense, didn't even count as a district. It began as a slum, but as more and more people arrived, the undercity grew, eventually reaching a scale that even the city's administrators could no longer ignore. Thus, a chaotic and lawless district was born. It hosted the largest black market trade in all of Old Dunling G, the final incinerator for all hidden information. It was separated by only a thin line from the world everyone else pursued. The dead sailor was from the undercity. In the eyes of Inverwig's residents, the people of the undercity weren't even human, they were just filth staining their beautiful city. The sailor's death became a topic of idle gossip. No one cared, except for one person, the man who killed him. Lorenzo walked through the undercity. He was currently on its edge, where basic infrastructure was non-existent. His boots sank deep into the muddy road with each step. If it were for his livelihood, Lorenzo would never come to this place. He wore a deerstalker hat dyed black, pressing down his short, pale-gold hair. A dark red eye was knotted at his chest, and a wide, gray-black greatcoat perfectly concealed the firearm beneath. He held a cane and occasionally checked his pocket watch, looking like a merchant in a hurry. Lorenzo's attire was just right, no different from an ordinary pedestrian. But he was in the undercity, and to its inhabitants he was a fat sheep that had wandered into their midst. People from various countries and regions watched this fat sheep from the corners, sizing him up. This area was outside the constable's jurisdiction. Even if someone died, it was rarely investigated. The flow of people was immense. Countless individuals arrived in the city by ship every day. They came in all shapes and sizes, and they knew who to target and who to leave alone. A few newcomers took an interest in Lorenzo. They whispered amongst themselves, dividing his possessions. One wanted his greatcoat, another his pocket watch. The others were merely indifferent. After the undercity became Old Dunling G's black market, a new, dark industrial chain had formed. Those who dared to rob people were mostly gang members. Helping would only get themselves involved. On the filthy street, the group surrounded Lorenzo, their eyes menacing. "Nice clothes, friend." The leader looked at Lorenzo with a smile. It wasn't a friendly one. He had just noticed that Lorenzo's pocket watch was worth more than it looked. "If I were you, I wouldn't do this." His voice was tinged with weariness, as if he was used to this. Lorenzo was completely unfazed by his predicament. This was how it was in the undercity. He had once skilled a few desperate men in front of dozens of onlookers, thinking he'd established some authority. But every time he came back, it was the same. Lorenzo had thought someone was targeting him, but he later realized it was simply that those people were gone. This was the undercity, a temporary residence for outsiders. Legally, it wasn't protected by the kingdom, and its inhabitants weren't considered citizens. Beyond it lay the mouth of the Thames, where Inverwig's largest port was located. The people who scraped by in the undercity might be here one day and gone on a fishing boat to other seas the next. Gangs were another factor. The black market's profits were limited, and for a piece of the action, gangs clashed in the undercity daily. People died every day. Their bodies were thrown directly into the Thames, and after passing through the filters of the steam hub, they were incinerated along with other refuse. It wasn't that no one remembered Lorenzo, it was just that they died too quickly. A gleaming knife flashed before Lorenzo's eyes. Just as he was contemplating how to deal with these reckless thugs, the sound of urgent hoofbeats rang out. A black carriage stopped by the side of the street. The coachman, seeing the situation, didn't hesitate to pull out a pistol and fire at the thugs. He showed no mercy. After a few shots, the thugs' bodies lay in front of Lorenzo. The gunshots sent the people on the street scattering in panic. In an instant, the empty street was left with only him and the coachman. "Mr. Holmes?" The coachman seemed to have trouble making out Lorenzo's face due to his age, yet his shots had been so precise. It was hard to judge this man. "That's me." Glancing at the crest on the carriage, Lorenzo boarded without hesitation. However, he didn't sit inside the carriage but took a seat up front with the coachman. "What was that about?" Lorenzo asked, looking at the bodies on the ground with disgust. "Stowaways. There have been more and more of them lately. Most are criminals thinking they can start a new life in Old Dunling, but they don't realize that a new life means saying goodbye to the old one. They still think like thugs, and they've been causing a lot of trouble recently." The coachman cracked his whip, and the carriage started moving slowly, advancing along the muddy road. "Doesn't the Shrike do anything about this?" "The master has been very busy lately. 2 gangs are on the verge of war over territory. He's been mediating. Those 2 gangs control important industries. The master doesn't care if they win or lose, but their conflict will inevitably affect those industries. Their lives aren't worth that much." Sounds like him," Lorenzo said with a nod. "By the way, Mr. Holmes, if you plan to come next time, please let us know in advance. I'll come and pick you up. It can avoid some unnecessary trouble," the coachman added. As considerate as a butler, Lorenzo nodded without speaking. Although he hadn't been in the carriage for long, it was clear he had arrived at his destination. Behind a series of dilapidated buildings was a hidden castle, constructed from various pieces of rubble, adorned with tattered flags and iron frames like a work of art by some eccentric artist. He got off the carriage and tipped his hat to the coachman in thanks. It was a gesture he had spent a long time learning in etiquette class. He couldn't be bothered to think about the proper occasion for it, but it had become part of his habits. He walked towards the Buzzard Castle. The half-minus open gate swung open for him, and the true face of the Undercity was revealed. Unlike the decrepit up outside, the interior was as opulent as the inner city, as if he had instantly teleported from a slum to the Platinum Palace. It was already late October, and the weather was turning cold. But the moment he stepped inside, Lorenzo felt a wave of heat, not just physically, but in his heart as well. The space inside was much larger than it appeared from the outside. Priceless paintings hung on pale gold walls, and the marble floor reflected his image. Attendants in ornate masks carried trays, serving drinks at the various gambling tables. On a central stage, a woman's distant, ethereal voice sang, driving the atmosphere of the entire casino. Exquisite iron cages around the room burned with incense. The scent was pleasant but contained a mild stimulant, compelling hesitant guests to bet all their chips. This was the true Undercity, a world of extravagance and debauchery. Unlike the inner city, this place was unregulated, becoming a den for many nobles to dispose of illicit goods. They appeared to be gambling, but they were actually channeling their wealth through another avenue. The volume of covert currency transactions he reached was a sum unimaginable to ordinary people. Of course, many thrill-seeking aristocrats also came here. They were all VIPs of the Undercity. The Shrike had told him all this. According to Inverwig law, the crimes of every person here were enough to sentence them to life in prison. Of course, that would also mean at least a third of Old Dunling's nobility would disappear. No one-stop Lorenzo. Unlike the short-lived outsiders, the people here had long lifespans. They knew exactly who Lorenzo was. Pushing open one iron door after another, Lorenzo easily reached the deepest part of the underground. And there, he met the client for this job. The man wore an exquisite silver mask, carved with thorns and a bird. He sat behind an oak desk. The room was also filled with incense, and a song flowed slowly from a gramophone. He had his eyes closed, waving his hands like a conductor, until Lorenzo's arrival shattered the world he was immersed in. "Welcome, my friend." He saw Lorenzo and greeted him with a smile. This was the true ruler of the Undercity, the man to whom all gangs bowed, the Shrike. Butcher Bird Shrike. Lorenzo sat down opposite him without ceremony, wasting no time on pleasantries. There was nothing on him. He was like a madman before he died. Couldn't get anything out of him, and there are no clues to follow. "Oh? Is that really so?" The Shrike took out a wine glass from under the desk and poured his favorite wine into it. "Lorenzo, you're the best detective I've ever seen. You must have found more than that, right?" Hearing the Shrike's words, Lorenzo sighed in resignation. "It's just speculation." "What speculation?" Hearing Lorenzo, the Shrike's interest was piqued. As expected, Lorenzo Holmes never disappointed him. "I tracked him down through a drug dealer. A sailor from the Undercity, not much income, but he was buying hallucinogens from different dealers every day. By the time I found him, the sailor seemed to have already injected a large dose. His speech was slurred, and we were near the inner city with constables everywhere. I couldn't ask much. So I speculate he encountered something that terrified him so much that he could only escape through hallucinogens." Lorenzo's voice was soft, as if he were reciting a chilling story. "Why do you think it was something terrifying?" For some reason, the Shrike was very concerned with the word terrifying. "Because I shot him square in the chest. Dozens of pellets tore through his heart, lungs, and bones. Even on hallucinogens, he would have felt the pain and sobered up. You see, people are afraid of death. With a little persuasion, he would have been utterly subservient to me in his final moments, answering whatever I asked. But he didn't. He kept speaking in some foreign tongue I couldn't understand. And though the pellets had ruined his face, I could see the look of blissful release on it. It was as if I hadn't killed him but rescued him from some nightmare. The Shrike was stunned by his words. He ignored Lorenzo's speculation and focused on his actions. You killed him? You were supposed to bring him to me alive. Huh? Lorenzo was taken aback. You didn't say you wanted him alive. And would you please remember who you are? You're the Shrike, the boss of the entire Undercity. The nobles in the parliament want you dead, and the gangs below want you dead. Only with you gone can they become the next boss. He took the wine glass and started drinking, continuing, I was thinking of you. People who know my identity more or less know about our relationship, and you repeatedly emphasized that this matter had to be kept secret. I figured it must be important, right? They all want to take you down, and I won't leave them any leverage on something this important. See? Just a dead sailor. No one would ever suspect you. Lorenzo put down the glass and spread his hands. The best of both worlds. So your best of both worlds is to kill the only clue and then come here for a drink? The Shrike Stone was calm. He calmly took a revolver from under the desk. The gleaming silver surface was engraved with reliefs of gods and demons, so exquisite it hardly looked like a firearm. I hope you understand one thing. You are my employee, and I am your employer. Acting like this won't get you paid. Instead, you'll get a bullet. Without even looking up at Lorenzo, he loaded one bullet after another into the cylinder, leaving one chamber empty. Then he spun the cylinder and pointed the muzzle at Lorenzo. You're the best detective I've ever seen, but what you did was truly stupid. So want to try your luck? A 1- in -6 chance. The Shrike looked at Lorenzo seriously. He wasn't joking. The smile on Lorenzo's face stiffened. All right, you really are no fun. He waved his hand, trying to push the muzzle down, but the Shrike immediately raised it again. Seeing this, Lorenzo knew he had no choice but to explain things clearly under the gun. I've been following that sailor for days. His name was Vol, a Viking from the northern seas. For the past few days, he'd been drifting between several drug dealers, showing no intention of returning to the port. It seemed like his captain had abandoned him. When you gave me this case, you just told me to investigate this person. You said he had a secret. As if the gun wasn't there, Lorenzo became casual again. Honestly, the request for this case is ridiculous. You don't even know his secret, yet you want me to investigate. Identity, social connections, nothing. He was a clean slate until I saw him inject the hallucinogen. What about it? The Shrike was particularly concerned about anything related to the sailor, Vol. It was ridiculous, you know? Lorenzo rambled on, mimicking an injection on his own neck. A whole syringe of hallucinogen. For a normal person, that's a lethal dose. He just shot it all in, and he'd been doing it for several days straight. I confirmed this with the dealers. He bought it every day. I thought it might be because of the Viking physique. After all, their pirate ancestors once fought their way to the gates of Old Dunling. At this, Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. Talking about this dark history always made him particularly happy. I found a Viking in the Undercity and tested it. A full syringe, and he was foaming at the mouth. So there was something wrong with Vol's body? The Shrike grasped the key point. Yes, something very wrong with his body. And not just that, he was extremely aggressive. In these few days, he killed at least 6 people. How else do you think a sailor got that kind of money? And yes, I did kill him, but he begged me too. Lorenzo recalled that night. Amidst the rising white steam and the light from the Zeppelin, Lorenzo was a dark silhouette. Below him was a twisted, barely living mass of flesh. Dark red blood oozed from every bullet hole, his chest heaving violently, a whimpering sound coming from his throat. Although he couldn't understand the sound, it was as if he understood its meaning. Kill me, take me away. Then, I plunged my sword Midas cane down through the bullet wounds. Lorenzo drew his cane. The black would split open, revealing the cold gleam beneath. I pierced his cervical spine. The carotid artery ruptured, massive internal bleeding. He died quickly, but that's when the strange thing happened. As Lorenzo told his story, the Shrike couldn't help but lean forward, listening intently to every word, constructing the scene of that night in his mind. He should have been dead. He was definitely dead, but his heart was still beating violently. You could say his brain was dead, but his body was still alive, pumping a continuous stream of blood out of the bullet holes. This was completely abnormal. I used my sword minus cane to pierce his heart again. Only then did the corpse truly die. The story ended. The Shrike was silent, seemingly lost in thought. Lorenzo wasn't in a hurry, just sipping his wine. He knew that anything the Shrike kept here was good stuff. He'd drink as much as he could. You should have brought his body back. No need. No need. You knew there was something wrong with that body. This time, the Shrike was truly angry, looking as if he was about to shoot. And what if I did? This is a casino, not a morgue. You have a bunch of thugs, but not a single coroner. Do you even know how many bones are in a human body? Lorenzo looked at the Shrike with disdain and continued. Vol's body is now lying in the morgue of Victorious Enteral Hospital, being dissected by a group of forensic pathologists who spent God knows how long graduating from the Royal Medical College. Cut open piece by piece, neatly arranged on an iron rack. like a sumptuous human feast. Every abnormality is strictly recorded in the report according to regulations, and all of it is just sitting there waiting for me to pick it up. He took out his pocket watch and checked the time. They get off work in 2 hours. Do you have any more questions? A gift from the north. Lorenzo spoke with confidence. He loved this, feeling as though he were insulting the Shrike's intelligence without saying it directly. The Shrike remained silent. It was always like this. Just as he was about to pull the trigger and kill this goddamn detective, the man would prove his worth, leaving him furious. So that's your plan? To use those forensic pathologists? Lorenzo nodded. You have to admit, Shrike, everyone has their specialty. I once attended a class at the Royal Medical College. A twisted expression as if recalling a nightmare crossed Lorenzo's face. Honestly, it was the first time I felt so lost in the face of knowledge. Of course you have your uses too. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to this godforsaken undercity to see you. Lorenzo was always as confident, completely unfazed by the fact that the Shrike had just been pointing a gun at him. Shrike, I came here mainly to ask you some questions. What questions? The Shrike placed the gun on the table. He had fallen into Lorenzo's rhythm again. He was the employer, the boss of the entire Undercity, but whenever Lorenzo launched into a long speech, he always felt a step below, like a teacher and his student. Lorenzo was the delinquent teacher, not teaching his students anything, but merely playing with their minds to show off his own superiority as if he derived satisfaction from it. Shrike, I need to know the full picture of this case. Lorenzo stared intently at the Shrike. His blurry figure was reflected in the unique blue-green eyes of an Inverwig native. A sailor with a secret you want to know. Shrike, I'm a detective, not a raider. I need to know the whole story to get to the bottom of things. Otherwise, I'll just go home and try to cook up a plausible story for you. Grabbing the edge of the table, Lorenzo pulled himself closer. He leaned in towards the Shrike, the two of them looking like the closest of friends. So, care to talk? Lorenzo asked with a smile. The story began half a month ago. According to Inverwig law, the period from mid-June to mid-September was the fishing moratorium. All fishing boats were docked and forbidden from setting sail. But one day, half a month ago, a fishing boat arrived at Rendonay Harbor in the thick fog. My men had been tracking that boat for a long time. They set off from the Viking kingdom of Nobido, changed course to pass through the Sea of Ice, and finally arrived at Rendonay Harbor half a month ago. Doesn't sound suspicious. During the moratorium every year, many fishing boats fish in other waters and bring their catch to Old Dunling. Lorenzo commented as he listened. The problem is after their boat docked, they didn't unload their cargo and no one came out. It just sat there at the pier. After a few days of exposure to the sun, the fish and shrimp started to stink, and that's when it drew attention. So, was this fishing boat of any value? This was the essential question. Everything had its value, even this fishing boat now. A boat that hadn't been unloaded. Lorenzo couldn't understand how it had alarmed a big shot like the Shrike. It wasn't just a simple fishing boat. The Shrike revealed the hidden story. The alcohol buoyed the atmosphere, making him feel much better. My business isn't just in Old Dunling. I have dealings in the surrounding areas as well. That boat was carrying something it shouldn't have. My men were tracking it with a new type of steamship, more than twice as fast as theirs. They were supposed to intercept them in the North Sea, send that unlucky fishing boat to its eternal rest at the bottom of the ocean, and send those Vikings back to their Valhalla. He drained the remaining wine in his glass and continued. But something unexpected happened. It was as if Odin himself favored them. The fishing boat sailed into the Sea of Ice, and my men lost track of them in a storm. Then, just as I said, they arrived at Rendonay Harbor. The fish and shrimp were just a cover. The real cargo had long since been moved. So I'm supposed to be looking for that mysterious cargo, right? Lorenzo bowed his head, smoking his pipe, nodding as he spoke. Yes. According to the crew list, that VOL was a sailor on the Silverfish. After they arrived, the whole crew vanished into thin air. VOL was the only one I could find a trace of. Including the captain and first mate, there were 17 in total. Excluding the deceased VOL, the remaining 16 are still missing. But now, the only one, VOL, has been killed by you, the Shrike said irritably. Lorenzo looked at him, his confusion not diminishing. Why didn't you do it yourself? It's just catching a man. This cargo is related to a certain duke. My men can't be seen at the scene. The Shrike was a king in the darkness, but when faced with a noble duke, he still showed hesitation. What about the cargo? I don't know. I only know it was sealed in an iron box. Lorenzo laughed. See, another vague request. Can I just grab an iron box from a blacksmith and come claim my reward? This time, the Shrike didn't get angry at Lorenzo's provocation. He was calm, uncharacteristically so. Do you believe in things like a sixth sense? You mean intuition? Something like that. The Shrike's gaze fell upon the revolver on the table. He was captivated by the engravings of gods and demons on the cylinder. The first time you see it, you'll understand. It's like intuition. When you see that iron box, you'll recognize it. His words were cryptic, a side of him Lorenzo had never seen before. He felt a sense of foreboding. Shrike, you're still not telling me everything. This was a fragmented story. Even Lorenzo was at a loss. There were shadows behind it that he couldn't see. You're just a detective I hired, not my accountant. It's better for you not to know too much about my business. The Shrike refused to reveal more, his eyes resolute. It's for your own good. The rest of the information is here. The carriage is waiting for you outside. You can look it over on the way to the hospital. The Shrike took out a file, flipped through a few pages, tore out the parts Lorenzo shouldn't know, and tossed it to him. You know how much I trust you. I am the hateful butcher bird, and you are the iron thorn I use to impale my prey. The Shrike looked at him. So get out of here. If you can't handle this, I'll load the last bullet too. He was referring to the revolver with the 1- in -6 chance. All right. Lorenzo stood up, took the file, and turned to leave, but then he stopped. I still do things my way, right? I only care about the result. That was some kind of an answer. So Lorenzo pushed open the iron door and left without looking back. Stepping out of the stone castle, the cold air rushed into Lorenzo's nostrils. The air was so damp, cold, and oppressive. So cold. Old Dunling was like this. With thousands of tons of steam pervading the city day and night, it was always rainy and gloomy. The vapor gathered above the city like a dome of clouds, obscuring everything. The sun would illuminate the misty sky, turning it golden, as if the sky itself were on fire. The coachman was already waiting for Lorenzo outside. This time, Lorenzo went straight into the carriage and began to read the file. The scenery outside the window changed slowly. After passing several checkpoints, they entered the outer city. Unlike the dilapidated and desolate undercity, here one could see hour and Gothic and Baroque buildings everywhere. Tall steam towers stood between each block, with thick smoke rising from their chimneys, turning everything gray. This was the birthplace of steam technology, the most advanced city in the world. With technological innovation and development, everyone lived with hope. The file was held in an exquisite iron frame with mottled brass as decoration on the edges. This was a common decorative style of the era gears and pipes, as if everything were a steam machine. There was even a group of people who worshipped these hot machines, believing them to be a great power bestowed upon humanity by the gods. Opening the file, Lorenzo read carefully in the swaying carriage. The information here was much more detailed than what the Shrike had said. Most of it was from the direct accounts of the people investigated. The words were jumbled, but they were all recorded without exception. Reading this, Lorenzo felt a bit more comfortable. In the past, people only kept the important, concise parts when handling cases, making some records seem incredibly cold. Recording every word in detail was Lorenzo's suggestion. Only in this way could Lorenzo feel like he was facing a person when looking at the paper, a real person of flesh and blood rambling on, slowly telling everything. He reached into his coat and took out an ostentatiously carved iron box, inside which cigarettes were neatly arranged. He picked up a cigarette marked with a red line, put it between his lips, and looked at the file. The carriage filled with smoke, which rose slowly. Time seemed to slow down. The substance in the tobacco spread to his nerves after being exchanged in his blood. A faint light flickered in his gray-blue eyes. It was as if the carriage had entered another world. The view outside the window darkened, eventually turning into a pitch-black void. In this darkness, only the faint glow of Lorenzo's cigarette remained. "Let me see you," Lorenzo whispered. Accompanied by the glow of the cigarette, his fingers rubbed against the rough paper as he silently recited the words in the file. The so called, simply put, is when words become reality, like the classic God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. It was a narrative from the bottom of the heart, and so the spirit fermented in the darkness. Lorenzo looked at the file under the faint light. In the darkness, a rushing wind suddenly rose, carrying the fishy smell of the sea sweeping over him. Something seemed to be approaching Lorenzo. It crawled slowly on the ground, making a viscous, nauseating sound. Its eyes stared quietly at the contemplative man. Its top not far away. A clap of thunder split the sky, held captive by the storm, illuminating the darkness for a fleeting moment. The earth shook. Though it was only for an instant, one could see Lorenzo sitting in his chair, head bowed in thought. As the view pulled back, it became clear that he was on the deck of the Silverfish. The sea battered the sinking ship, and a strange, cold wind caressed him. And before him, on the cracked and damp deck, stood a crowd of people. As if none of it existed, Lorenzo looked up coldly at the silhouettes, deathly pale under the lightning. Seaweed like hair swayed in the wind, and seawater dripped like blood. Lorenzo showed no fear, as if everything were perfectly normal. "Where did you all go?" he questioned in the strange darkness. The vanished crew, the mysterious cargo. He was searching for the strangeness hidden between the lines, the real force driving all of this. The fleeting lightning was about to fade. In the final moments of the light, Lorenzo noticed a faint, old smell of blood. The creature that had been staring at him in the darkness. He snapped his head around. Lorenzo had found it, the key point. His gaze swept over quickly. It was a hideous corner of something, but then that corner overlapped with a familiar face, and a voice sounded. "Mr. Holmes?" The coachman opened the carriage door, looking at Lorenzo, who was shrouded in smoke. His eyes were dull and empty, as if he were looking at him. It wasn't until the ash burned Lorenzo's fingers that he snapped out of it, as if waking from a long dream, and dropped the cigarette butt. As the coachman opened the door, the strange, dreamlike scene ended. The sky was still gloomy. There was a hint of disappointment on the coachman's face. "Sir, I thought you didn't touch things like hallucinogens." Victoria Central Hospital had been reached long ago. He had called out to Lorenzo many times without a response. Even when he opened the door, Lorenzo was still in that dazed, hallucinatory state. Although he worked for the boss of all the gangs, the coachman still instinctively recoiled from things like hallucinogens. Young people thought they were the key to heaven, but to him, they were an invitation to hell. "You know, in my line of work, sometimes you need a little inspiration," Lorenzo said with a smile, not answering directly. The coachman stepped aside to let him pass. As Lorenzo got out of the carriage, he muttered, "If you need it, I know a few good addiction specialists, though their methods are a bit rough." Out of politeness, Lorenzo smiled and thanked the coachman for his concern, then strode towards the magnificent Castle Minas-like hospital. The mutated corpse. Victoria Central Hospital, one of the oldest hospitals in all of Inverwig. Its top -tier medical standards were commensurate with its long history. The hospital had been expanded several times over the years, and was now one of the few buildings in Old Dunling to span to districts. To ensure its medical capabilities, the Mechanicum had even established a dedicated power supply line just for it. Sue Allen Hall, Old Dunling's highest security force, was located not far from Victoria Central Hospital. If needed, mounted police could arrive here with loaded rifles within 10 minutes of receiving an order. Due to its immense size, Victoria Central Hospital had taken on many other functions in recent years, such as collaborating with Sue Allen Hall. The bodies from criminal cases were all sent here for autopsy. The sailor VOL's body was clearly not considered important. Unclaimed and insignificant, his corpse should have been transferred directly to the Royal Medical College for students to practice on. However, at someone's insistent request, this worthless body underwent a rare autopsy. An officer looked at the young woman standing in the corridor, a look of impatience on his face. If it were for her insistence on an autopsy, he would be at his desk enjoying a rare break. In Old Dunling, people from the Undercity were not even considered citizens by the officers. Unless a case involved someone from the outer city or within, they never paid it much attention. But this young woman was different. This was the first case she had taken on, and she was determined to find something, anything. Full of passion, brimming with energy. Once upon a time, the officer had been just like her. But now, he was just a man whose edges had been worn smooth by life. Perhaps seeing a reflection of his former self in the girl, he endured it. In his view, life was dull, the girl would give up in a few days. He just had to wait. "Is the report not out yet?" The woman finally grabbed another nurse, asking anxiously, "Officer, you know the procedure. The report needs to be reviewed and signed by the director. He might be busy right now. Please be patient," the nurse said with an awkward smile. Since the body arrived this morning, this young officer had been waiting here, asking every hour. It was truly annoying. What did she think an autopsy was? Butchering a pig? Even that took half a day to bleed out. What could they find in such a short time? "Oh, all right." A hint of disappointment appeared on her excited face, but it was quickly replaced by renewed interest at the sound of a loud explosion. The explosion came from the street. The violent shockwave shattered the outer windows, and panic screams filled the air as gray fog billowed everywhere. "Eve!" The officer shouted her name and drew his baton. "Is it a terrorist attack, Officer Press?" As a newly minted detective, Eve excitedly drew her service pistol. "It's probably just an old underground steam pipe that exploded and blew a manhole cover. Put your gun away. We're going to maintain order." Looking at this energetic rookie, Press felt a headache coming on. He cursed his luck. Why did he have to be the one to train this newcomer? Hot's team filled the street. After a brief moment of panic, the crowd settled down. Old Dunling was vast, not just in area, but also in its massive underground facilities. Beneath people's feet lay the world's most complex network of pipes, growing wild like a dense spitter bear under the city. Maintaining such a large facility was obviously difficult. Accidents from aging pipes like this happened from time to time. They were nothing new. The annoyed officer and the young detective walked out of the hospital together. The fog filled their vision. It seemed someone had slipped past her, moving through the mist beside her. Eve looked back blankly at the gray water vapor. "Eve, hurry up," Press called out. Eve was still staring at the fog daze for a few seconds. She looked at Press on the other side of the mist, and then, as if making a decision, she turned and followed the faint sense of strangeness in her heart. A simple explosive was all it took to cause a commotion in Old Dunling. This was a lesson Lorenzo had learned from his years living in the city. Any explosion within the steam pipes would kick up thick clouds of water vapor, and this fog was perfect for helping Lorenzo move unseen. It would draw the attention of the guards, and all he had to do was get the report before they dealt with the pipe. He stepped into the hospital lobby with a casual swagger, showing no awareness that he was there to steal something. successfully diverted the guards and infiltrated the hospital by walking right through the front door. But now came the problem. Where was that important report? A figure in white entered his field of vision, and Lorenzo quickly had an idea. Lorenzo adjusted his expression, forcing a few tears into his gray-blue eyes. With a look of utter grief, he waved at a nurse. "My nephew was killed in the Undercity this morning. The guards told me to come for the autopsy report this afternoon. Could you please tell me where to go?" His eyes were sincere and sorrowful, as if Lorenzo truly had a nephew. The nurse first expressed her sympathy for Lorenzo's loss, then told him that the report should be given to him by the officers from Sue Allen Hall. However, perhaps moved by Lorenzo's genuine emotion, the nurse made an exception and told him where the director's office was. Although he couldn't get the report, he could at least learn the specific cause of his nephew's death. A few minutes later, the middle-aged, balding director was sitting obediently in his chair. Opposite him sat Lorenzo. Although he wanted to scream at this uninvited guest, the ornately decorated Winchester was currently pressed against his shiny forehead. For whatever reason, he could only try his best to remain calm. "This is the autopsy report you wanted. Is that all?" He handed the file to Lorenzo, cold sweat trickling down his smooth forehead. "Are there any copies?" Lorenzo asked without looking up, flipping through a few pages. "No, none," the director quickly replied, seeming to value the document greatly. "Is that so? Can you make another copy?" A strange request. It shouldn't be a problem for the pathologist to write another report, right? Then give that one to Sue Allen Hall. And finally, don't mention any of this to anyone. Can you do that? Although VOL was an insignificant outsider whose death no one cared about. If the autopsy report went missing or for some other reason attracted Sue Allen Hall's attention, it would undoubtedly cause Lorenzo a lot of trouble. Lorenzo's eyes were gold, like those of a cold-blooded killer. "Director Buscolo, you live at 147 Hammerling Street in the Outer City." His gaze swept over the envelopes on the desk, thoughts racing in his mind. On the other side, Buscolo felt a growing sense of immense fear. "You're not wearing a ring. I assume your wife divorced you, right? She took your son?" Like a master of deduction, Lorenzo's eyes darted back and forth, gathering every clue he could see. In his eyes, Buscolo was nearly transparent. His heart pounded violently. These unseen words were more terrifying and chilling than the shotgun currently pressed against his head. "She left you with a daughter. You dote on your daughter and she likes Scandi, right?" Lorenzo proudly delivered the final blow. Hearing this, Buscolo's psychological defenses completely crumbled. He couldn't understand how this man knew all this so clearly. His hands trembled uncontrollably. He might have had other ideas before, but when it involved his daughter, he broke down. Lorenzo walked out of Buscolo's office laden with spoils. He believed the middle-aged man would be a good father. Seeing a figure at the other end of the corridor, he smiled. "Thank you so much, nurse. Director Buscolo promised to help me properly examine my nephew's body. The murderer won't remain at large." It was the nurse who had given him directions earlier. Speaking so intimately, Lorenzo approached her and secretly handed her a few silver coins. "And thank you even more for the address, my dear nurse. Director Buscolo is very much looking forward to the gift I'm sending him." And so, under the smiling gaze of the nurse, Lorenzo strode away. There was no amazing deduction. It was all just premeditated. Lorenzo was a second-rate detective and a moral and violent one. But in a way, he was also a genius, a brilliant con man who could manipulate everything at his disposal. Perhaps he didn't have superhuman reasoning, but when it came to improvisational crime, he was a master of his generation. There was only a thin line between a genius detective and a genius criminal. Perhaps that line was called principles or conscience or something like that. But it was clear that Lorenzo had no such thing. He danced back and forth between the two. He pushed open an iron door. The temperature dropped noticeably. This was the morgue. Few people would come to this chilling place, so Lorenzo easily made his way here. The report was in his code, but VOL's strange state before death compelled Lorenzo to see it for himself. Like a demon from a dream, it was something he remembered for a long time. Which one is it? Following the number on the autopsy report, Lorenzo checked the nameplates on the iron cabinets. He grabbed a handle and pulled out a frost-covered cabinet, dragging it onto the floor. Lorenzo squatted down to look at the man he had killed not long ago. There were several new incisions on the body. Lorenzo pried one open with some effort, revealing the organs beneath. He had briefly glanced at the report on the way here. According to the pathologists, there were some problems with VOL's bones and internal organs, but he hadn't looked at the details. Inside was a twisted and nauseating scene. He wondered if the pathologists had thrown up when they got to this part. The internal organs were completely twisted together, a dark red, clot-like jelly encasing them. The intestines had begun to contract and were noticeably shorter than a normal person's, as if a part had been surgically removed, but there were no signs of surgery. There was also much less fat than in a normal person. Fat was used to store energy and provide insulation, but it was clear that this Viking's body fat percentage was astonishingly low. It shouldn't be like this. Vikings lived in freezing places. A constitution like VOL's would have frozen him to death, not allowed him to live this long. There were stones in his body, mostly distributed on the surface of the skin and at the joints. These things were very hard, a clot of crystalline substance and flesh, but they were like armor. This was what had protected VOL, while Lorenzo's first shotgun blast hadn't killed him outright. Lorenzo's brow furrowed. This reminded him of some unpleasant things. He picked up a nearby chair, sat down, and took out his cigarette case again. After careful consideration, he took one out. After a flash of light, intoxicating smoke slowly rose. The lights in the morgue went out one by one, until only the single point of light on the cigarette tip remained. The Fenqi herb. The Fenqi herb, a plant from the bountiful lands. According to scholars, it had another, more well-known name, mandrake. But in reality, the two were not the same at all. Mandrake was a common hallucinogenic herb, used as an anesthetic by the local natives, and was now a component of the rampant hallucinousness in the Undercity. The cigarette Lorenzo was smoking was rolled with Fenqi herb. Unlike the common mandrake, this herb was a spirit medium carefully cultivated by the local shamans. They believed that smoking this herb would build a bridge to the unknown, a medium to touch the mystical. They usually used it to communicate with the dead. Steam technology was so advanced that talk of ghosts and gods had long been forgotten, but there were still remnants of the old era who firmly believed in these things. Lorenzo had discovered its effects in an ancient book, and with the Shrike's help had obtained some from smugglers. At first, he tried it out of curiosity, but after so long in his detective work, Lorenzo found that it did indeed have some effect. What he saw was not just a simple hallucination, part of it was real, and that real part was what Lorenzo needed. The lights went out one by one. In the darkness, the cold air became damp. Lorenzo once again smelled the scent of the sea. Countless raindrops fell on the deck. He was back on that ship. In the darkness, the corpse slowly stirred. It was coming back to life. The light from the cigarette was not that bright, but everything in the darkness was so clear. Lorenzo watched quietly. The internal organs began to contract until the stomach and intestines were just a small section. The bones began to twist and deform, stretching the fragile skin from past growth. The dark red blood vessels beneath were clearly visible. A hoarse sound came from the shriveled throat like a death rattle. It was a terrifying scene, but Lorenzo didn't care. It was as if he had no fear. The cigarette was half-minus burned. The Fenqi herb connected him to the mysterious world. The time the cigarette burned was the time he could stay in this world of the dead. It wasn't enough. This wasn't enough. Suddenly, the feeling of being watched washed over him, so familiar, just like in the carriage. The thing that had been watching him in the darkness. Lorenzo snapped his head around, trying to find the strange figure in the darkness, but in the next second, a twisted body with a thick smell of blood knocked him over. It was VOL, or rather, VOL's corpse. It knocked Lorenzo off the chair, pinning him down with force. Sharp claws gripped his head tightly. The ribs opened like a predator's maw, clamping down on Lorenzo with dried blood. "Look at me." A voice seemed to sound. What met his eyes was a hideous face, filled with immense pain. Above it, the pupils were a murky black, but within them a faint green light shone. A sharp pain shot through his body, but Lorenzo didn't care. He looked directly into those pupils. In the reflection of the pitch-minus blackness, he finally saw that part of reality. It was a lighthouse rising from a ghostly green light. The cigarette finally burned out. Light returned to the world. Lorenzo was like an animal waking from hibernation, his movements stiff, his eyes dazed. He released his hand, and the cigarette but fell. He sat in the chair stunned for a long time before he recovered. This was the side effect. After every session, Lorenzo was briefly like an idiot. Everything was like a dream. VOL's body hadn't come back to life, it was still lying quietly in front of him. He hadn't been knocked over, he was sitting in his original spot. It was as if everything that had felt so real was just a hallucination, even though the pain had been so vivid. It was a hallucination, but it was also real. Like the last thing, he saw the lighthouse. Lorenzo couldn't be sure what role the lighthouse played in this case, but at least now he had a general idea. The strange body and the lighthouse. He slowly stood up. The stiffness was still there, which made him feel very uncomfortable. This might also be a side effect of the Fenqi herb. At first, this idiotic state was brief, but as he used it more frequently, it lasted longer and longer. Perhaps he could find that poor director Bruce Calo in a few days for a physical examination. He was a director, after all, it should save a lot of trouble, right? After all this, it was time to leave. But just then the sound of a gun being cocked rang out. Hands up. Eve raised her pistol, aiming the muzzle at Lorenzo. Eve's intuition had always been sharp, and this time was no exception. In the fog, she had felt someone walk past her. Unable to shake the feeling of strangeness, she had finally caught this sneaky person here. "Detective, what happened?" Turning around, Lorenzo's expression was perfect, a mixture of panic and composure, like a good citizen mistaken by the police. Old Dunling was a melting pot. As a great detective who navigated its currents, Lorenzo had to be a little bit of everything. "What are you doing?" Eve was a rookie. This was the first time she had pointed a gun at someone Looking at Lorenzo's expression, she really felt for a moment that she had made a mistake. "This is my nephew. He was murdered this morning. I couldn't bear the grief," Lorenzo said, covering his face. Eve took a few steps closer, still on her guard. "Your nephew is a Viking?" The body's face was unrecognizable, but the long braid beloved by Vikings was still attached to its head. Lorenzo's crying paused. Then Eve saw the nameplate on the cabinet. It was the case she was in charge of. The last bit of sympathy vanished. Eve said coldly, "Sir, you may need to come with me." The situation was awkward. Lorenzo had once snuck into the Royal Academy of Arts. To be able to get into character at any time to deceive others, he had studied in its acting department for over a year. At first, everyone thought he was a passing tourist, then an auditing student, then a student. In the end, even the professor knew this excellent student named Lorenzo and invited him to perform at the Royal Opera House. But this excellent student suddenly disappeared a year later. The professor threw all the lists but couldn't find anyone named Lorenzo Holmes. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Everyone remembered the talented young man, but his name was not on any attendance lists or even school records like a ghost. But no matter how good the performance, no matter how meticulous the deception, Lorenzo couldn't fool direct evidence. He gave an awkward smile. Eve was outwardly serious, but inwardly she was ecstatic. This case was indeed suspicious. Otherwise, why would this person sneak in to check this insignificant body? "Turn around," she threatened, and Lorenzo with the gun. He cooperated, turning around slowly. Eve lowered her gun and took out her handcuffs, but in an instant Lorenzo moved. The wide, knee-minus length black greatcoat swung out, filling most of Eve's vision. With one hand on her gun and the other on the newly minus-drawn handcuffs, the young detective clearly panicked. She pulled the trigger, but her slender hand couldn't handle the recoil. The bullet went wide. A large hole was blown in the black greatcoat. Then, a dark muzzle emerged from under the coat. "Detective, don't move." Lorenzo held the Winchester, his hand on the iron lever below. He cocked it. The tables had turned in an instant. Eve could only stare blankly at it all. Clearly, this was a bit much for the rookie. A newbie's first case involved a notorious detective who had been around Old Dunling for a long time. It was like putting a sheep in a cage with a hungry wolf. "This is the morgue. Not many people come here. Even if I killed you, no one would know it was me. Do you understand?" Eve nodded cooperatively. Even if she fired, she wouldn't be as fast as Lorenzo. And in terms of lethality, Lorenzo's gun was clearly more threatening. But then Eve realized something. "You killed him?" Oh, she had never seen such an exquisitely made shotgun. Wasn't it still a shotgun? The wound was consistent with the one that killed VOL. Combined with this mysterious man's suspicious infiltration of the morgue, Eve was sure it was the man in front of her who had killed VOL. If only she hadn't come alone. She should have called press. Although in this situation, what could press have done? "Don't slander me, detective. I'm a legal citizen of Inverwig." Lorenzo was telling the truth, but his identity had been arranged by the Shrike. The Shrike was very reliable in this regard. As long as you paid enough, he could create any identity for you. No, not forged, but an officially recognized identity. Lorenzo spouted nonsense, but his mind was working furiously, thinking about what to do next. Similarly, Eve was also thinking about what to do. She didn't want her first case to be her last. But just then, a translucent yellow liquid flowed past Lorenzo's feet, carrying a strange smell flowing in from outside the morgue door. "Detective, what do you think this is?" Lorenzo said suddenly, looking down. "I think it might be oil." "I think you're probably right." As Lorenzo's words fell, a raging fire surged in from the morgue door like a demon from hell. The instant flames ignited everything around them. The cold temperature of the morgue rose, becoming scorching hot. It was a dead end. This was the only door leading out, but now it was sealed by fire, and the fire was still intensifying. "What's going on?" At the last moment, Lorenzo pulled Eve away. Otherwise, Eve, who was standing by the door, would have been instantly engulfed by the flames. "It's a clue." The man's voice was tinged with a morbid excitement. Eve looked to the side. The firelight illuminated Lorenzo's face. In his pupils, a larger fire burned. As expected, VOL's death had attracted their attention. They didn't want the secret in VOL's body to be discovered, so they had set a fire here. "Detective, if you don't want to die, come and help," Lorenzo said, kicking over the iron cabinets that held the bodies. They were stacked on top of each other and could be separated. "What are you doing?" Eve couldn't understand what this man was doing. The fire was already burning right in front of them, and he was still messing with these dead bodies. "Staying to live. You don't want to be cremated in here with these corpses, do you? You in one pile, me in another, and we'll never be apart. My dear Winchester." Eve felt like she had been drawn into this man's rhythm. He placed the iron cabinet on an iron rack and tested the wheels. They were still smooth enough. "What are you going to do?" "Escape." Lorenzo tore off a white coat hanging in the corner and used it to tie the two cabinets together. "We can't just run out. The fire will ignite your clothes first. the heat will melt your eyes, and then in a single panic breath, air heated to hundreds of degrees will rush into your respiratory tract and then your lungs. Think about it, detective. It'll be like swallowing hot coals. Lorenzo described the gruesome death, then moved the assembled iron cart to the wall. So we need this. We'll ride it out like a skateboard. I remember the way we came. It's a straight line. Pointing to the inside of the gloomy iron cabinet, Lorenzo gestured. Ladies first. Eve was a bit stunned. You want me to get in there with you? She began to pray that her family would never find out about this. Being in the same room with a strange man, even though it was a morgue, was enough to make her father furious, let alone in such a tiny iron cabinet. We need a certain amount of momentum to get out. Otherwise, we'll stop halfway through the fire like to roasted pigs. You know what I mean, right? Compared to what Eve was thinking, Lorenzo was more concerned with his own life. First, the steam pipe explosion, then the fire. The fire was spreading in the morgue. It seemed no one was injured, but it was still a headache for Press. But amidst it all, he was looking for Eve. The rookie had disappeared. She was usually so passionate about cases, but now she was gone. Press thought this might be Eve's true nature, that she had been faking it before. But then another thought arose in his mind. Perhaps she was at the center of the incident. In the morgue, for example. That unlucky kid. Press panicked. But just then, an iron chariot burst out of the burning corridor. Lorenzo jumped out before it even stopped, and the hot chariot with Eve inside crashed into the wall. Fortunately, his clothes were thick. Lorenzo was just sweating a lot, but he had no time to recover. His gaze swept through the crowd as if looking for something. They were willing to set a fire in a hospital to cover up VOL's body. This was a place under the close watch of Sue Allen Hall. Clearly, the other party was very persistent, so they wouldn't just set the fire and leave. They had to make sure no one got out alive. That person was in a corner somewhere, quietly waiting for the fire to die down. What will you do now? Lorenzo put his hand in his pocket. There was a hole in his pocket that allowed him to reach under his clothes. To others, it looked like he was just putting his hand in his pocket, but in reality, his hand was already on the trigger. Now that the fire has a survivor, what will you do? His gray-minus blue eyes reflected the expression of every person. Lorenzo scrutinized everyone. They hadn't studied acting, someone was bound to show a flaw. So what will you do? Leave or kill me? No one would have thought that a sailor's death was related to a sudden fire in a hospital. After all, the value of the two was vastly different. Press struggled to get Eve out of the iron cabinet. The girl looked disheveled, but had an excited look on her face. It seemed she hadn't realized that if she had been a moment later, she and Lorenzo would have been grilled in a sea of fire. She finally felt the joy of being in her dream profession, that urgent, real feeling. She pushed aside the hair that was blocking her view, not caring about her appearance, wiped her face with her sleeve, and then stood up with difficulty. The scene was chaotic. This was a hospital. Although the fire showed no signs of spreading further, it was enough to cause panic. Lorenzo watched it all intently. The crowd would move slowly. Once they saw the extent of the fire, they would leave. Of course, there would be some who just liked to watch and would stay put. The doctor? There weren't many white coats in the crowd. Most just glanced over and returned to their post. The rest of the nurses were busy helping with water, trying to control the fire. A patient? Most of the onlookers were family members, but they were just watching, marveling, and then praying. Lorenzo shook his head forcefully. No, my thinking is wrong. That person needed a safe position. He could retreat and blend into the crowd to leave, or advance to see if there were any survivors. He used a large amount of oil to start the fire. Neither a patient nor a doctor could bring such a large barrel of oil in without attracting attention. The puzzle shattered into countless pieces, and Lorenzo picked them up one by one, filling in the gaps. The broken mirror was pieced together bit by bit, revealing the final image. Lorenzo's hand tightened on the trigger under his greatcoat. He had found him, the person no one would have noticed. A janitor pushing a cart full of oil. He poured the oil on the ground, then pretended to mop. When no one was near, he lit it. Yes, no one would notice a janitor, let alone investigate his filthy water bucket. The identity was confirmed, so the position was also easy to determine. Just around the corner in front of Lorenzo. If he peeked his head out, he could see here. A step back, and he could rush into the lobby and blend into the crowd. Excuse me, everyone, please make way. Lorenzo suppressed the excitement in his veins and approached that position. Seeing Lorenzo leave, Eve immediately shouted to Press. There's something wrong with that man. Don't let him leave. Hearing this, Press immediately drew his pistol and shouted, Sir, please cooperate. Although he didn't know what he was talking about, Lorenzo's strange demeanor made him suspicious. It was as if he had seen him somewhere before. Troublesome people. Lorenzo cursed inwardly. The next second, he strode forward and rushed into the crowd. He knew how well these detectives could shoot. They wouldn't dare to fire with him in a crowd. As Lorenzo ran, the crowd suddenly stirred. They were frightened, and by this man who had emerged from the fire with a strangely excited expression. They couldn't help but step back, clearing a path for him. That person panicked after all. Seeing Lorenzo rapidly approaching, a janitor couldn't help but retreat in panic. Once he turned the corner and started running, Lorenzo wouldn't be able to catch him. With the large flow of people in the hospital and the arriving guards, Lorenzo would have no other chance. So now it was time for rule number 7 in the Lorenzo Holmes Detective's Handbook. Lorenzo always felt his book should be in textbooks. What if the suspect runs? Before he gets out of sight, shoot him in the leg. The Winchester under his greatcoat was suddenly raised. Lorenzo's hand had been on the trigger all along. He was a taut string ready to strike at any moment. No one would have thought this man was hiding a shotgun under his greatcoat. The deafening roar made everyone's eardrums ache. Dust flew and rubble splattered. The running figure stumbled and fell before he could even start. This was the effective range of the Winchester. The pellets directly pierced and shattered his calf. A large smear of blood appeared on the ground. Before he could even scream, he could only whimper and continue to crawl on the ground. Lorenzo wouldn't let him get away so easily. He hooked the trigger guard, and the Winchester spun gracefully in the air. As a lever-minus-action shotgun, it ejected the hot shell casing, and with the Satisful G-crisp sound, was reloaded. God, I love this gun. The shotgun had a short grip, just the right length to be hidden under Lorenzo's greatcoat. Of course, there was a deeper reason that no one else in this world would have thought of. Don't run, my friend. Lorenzo ran forward, but just then a dense volley of gunfire rang out. The shots came from outside. From the janitor's position, he could just see the situation in the lobby, so the people in the lobby could also see him. He wasn't acting alone. Now that the mission had failed, his accomplices had decided to sacrifice him to cover up everything. A bullet pierced his skull. He froze while crawling on the ground and died. Filthy blood pooled on the floor. This wasn't the end. A more intense rain of bullets suppressed Lorenzo, preventing him from getting close to the lobby. Honestly, Lorenzo was becoming more and more curious about what the silverfish was carrying. What kind of strangeness was loaded in that mysterious iron box? He took a deep breath. This wasn't a group of well-trained soldiers, probably just a bunch of thugs paid to do a job, so their intelligence wouldn't be high enough to use alternating fire. Therefore, this seamless barrage would have a moment of interruption. Just as Lorenzo thought, amidst the background noise of the crowd's screams, there was a gap in the gunfire. This was a fatal mistake. The most important lesson in any army was to teach them to use alternating fire. One group fires while the other reloads, creating continuous, perceivous fire. In this precious gap, the great detective leapt out. The Winchester thundered. The aftertaste of black powder lingered in his nostrils. It was more intoxicating than any hallucinogen. The dense pellets directly shattered a man's chest, a curtain of blood splashing from his back. Then the figure was thrown backward by the impact. He had expected some resistance, but there was nothing. They weren't reloading, they were retreating. This was Lorenzo's oversight. When the fire broke out, reinforcements from Sue Allen Hall were already on their way. At the speed of the mounted police, they would definitely arrive within 10 minutes. They didn't want to get bogged down. Once the mounted police arrived, the situation would be out of their control. The sound of horses neating came from outside the lobby, followed by the sound of urgent hoofbeats fading into the distance. Lorenzo was too slow. He pushed through the crowd, stepped over the body on the ground, and chased after them. More gunshots greeted him, but they were just to scare him off, not aimed at all. But by now, this group had done what they needed to do. Lorenzo couldn't catch them. He could only watch them gallop away. Lorenzo was just an ordinary person, he couldn't catch these damn guys. Just as he was at a loss, a loud steam whistle sounded. As if sent from heaven, it came speeding towards him from not far away. The traffic lights all turned red to clear a path for it. And so, the iron serpent, breathing white steam, came roaring along the tracks beneath his feet. Old Dunling was big, very big. As the capital of Inverwig, Old Dunling had been slowly expanding throughout its history. When steam power emerged, this expansion reached its peak. Its built minus-up area was staggering, occupying the central part of Inverwig Island. But the first negative effect of such a huge urban area was the enormous cost of transportation. For a citizen from the East End to get to a factory in the West End, it would take half a day on foot. The average citizen's income couldn't afford a steam car, let alone keep a damn horse to ride to work. To solve this problem, the Mechanicum began a new round of renovations in Old Dunling a decade ago. They bored through underground tunnels and established a train system that could cross the entire city. They called this thing the Metro, which looked like a scaled minus-down underground train. On the surface, they laid tracks embedded in the ground, on which steam-powered trams called Iron Serpents ran. This transportation system, with Old Dunling as its test hub, was expanded nationwide after its success. In recent years, they have been trying to incorporate Eppelins into this vast transportation system, so that the skies would bear the footprints of the people of Inverwig, the Midgard Serpent. The mechanics of the mechanic used this name from Norse mythology to refer to this transportation system. This beautiful and prosperous world was the Midgard of myth. In time, everyone could become a part of this world serpent for a small fee, encircling this ever-shrinking world with machinery and steam. Victoria Central Hospital was also a well-known stop. A steam tram passed by here every 10 minutes or so, and this time Lorenzo happened to catch it. Sorry, my friend. The doors opened, and Lorenzo, shouldering his extremely dangerous shotgun, made a beeline for the driver's cabin. After shooing away the innocent passengers, the driver was thrown off the steam tram without much of a fight. Then, the Iron Serpent, breathing steam, gradually accelerated and sped along the tracks. The Loam-Inus, abiding citizens of Old Dunling had never seen such a spectacle. Even press was a bit stunned. This was Old Dunling, the heart of Inver Wig. At any given moment, there were at least 3 Zeppelins patrolling the skies on standby. On board were fully armed Sky-Minus cavaliers in red greatcoats. They were the strong line of defense for Old Dunling's order and safety. When an emergency occurred, you would only see the Sky-Minus obscuring behemoth, and then under its shadow, red-minus shirted soldiers would descend on ropes and blow your head off with a single shot. First a steam pipe explosion and fire, then a shootout, and now hijacking a steam tram. Although he couldn't figure out what was going on, it was certain that these troublemakers would be caught and locked up for life. This was a major event in Press's career. He belatedly raised his gun and ran towards the steam tram, but then he saw a figure hanging onto the back of it. Press's heart skipped a beat. This is at least a third minus class merit, right? Despite the wind roaring in her ears, the girl looked nonchalant, muttering to herself. Eve clung tightly to the handle on the steam tram. She had managed to catch up just as it was starting to move. This unlucky kid hadn't yet realized the danger she was in. Her mind was filled with thoughts of the next day's Queen's Daily newspaper, with the headline new, Sue Allen Hall detective solves major case on first day. Awarded third minus class merit, invited to Platinum Palace for an audience with the Queen, reaches the pinnacle of life as Old Dunling's police superintendent. The thought of reaching the pinnacle of her life before she was even 30 was, indeed, exceptionally dull. Aboard the Iron Serpent, Lorenzo didn't share Eve's sense of dullness. At this moment, his condition was excellent. The steam whistle blared all the way, like the Grim Reaper rushing to a kill. Pedestrians on the road scrambled to get out of the way. Lorenzo was a man of learning. His room was filled with books, and he knew a little about everything, including the steam tram. Although he wasn't entirely clear on its detailed operation, looking at the simple control panel, he felt he could handle the basics. He had to catch up with that group. They were the only clues in this cloud of suspicion. Soon, the group appeared in Lorenzo's sight. The roads of Old Dunling were congested, and riding a horse was bound to be slow, unless you were a mounted policeman with a blaring whistle or a madman like Lorenzo on an Iron Serpent. Faced with the law and their own lives, even the most irascible citizen was happy to make way. He wedged something into the control lever, grabbed the iron edge, and flipped himself onto the roof of the tram. The people at the Mechanicum, though a bit crazy, were very rigorous in their work. The steam tram had been part of the Midgard Serpent system for many years and had a set of safety emergency measures. Under emergency braking, they could come to a quick stop. His gaze slid down the barrel of his gun to the suspect not far away. Lorenzo didn't need to catch all of them, he just needed the slowest one. He pulled the trigger. A clap of thunder. The bullet tore through the horse's leg. The poor animal and its rider fell together, sliding several meters along the ground. Lorenzo thought he had succeeded, but then another gunshot rang out. The suspect on the ground was shot and killed. No loose ends. At this moment, Lorenzo finally felt the gravity of the situation. He was not facing a simple group of thugs. Ordinary thugs did not have such a resolute will. There must be someone in this group acting as an insurance policy responsible for killing any stragglers to protect the secret of the silverfish. This was not something the little hooligans of the Undercity could pull off. Lorenzo was in a stalemate, but the way to break it was also simple: kill them until only one was left. A person's will is both resolute and fragile. Lorenzo was betting that when he caught the person acting as the insurance policy, that person would not have the courage to put the gun in his own mouth. One chasing, the other fleeing, a rare chase scene unfolded in Old Dunling. The suspects began to change direction. If they continued forward, they would reach the inner city, which was crawling with constables. Their goal was to get to the Undercity. Once they reached that den of thieves, even if Sue Allen Hall intervened, they wouldn't be able to catch them. It was a tumor growing all Dunling. Forcibly removing, it would only result in mutual destruction, which was why that dog, the Shrike, could be so arrogant and still be alive. He had to intercept them before they reached the Undercity. Otherwise, once they were there, Lorenzo might not be able to protect himself. Come on, use that clever brain of yours. Your morals may be second minus rate, but your mind is first minus rate. He tried hard to recall everything he could use. Countless lines formed a map of Old Dunling. On it, the blue line, representing Lorenzo, chased the red line, and the red line was about to reach its destination, the Undercity. The blue line continued to extend, but at the next intersection, it shattered into countless lines, filling every street of Old Dunling, coming from all directions to surround and intercept the red line. Finally, just as the red line was about to reach its destination, a blue line blocked it. Thanks to the Old Dunling steam tram operation map hanging in the driver's cabin, Lorenzo had found the only way. Eve, using all her strength, finally climbed into the steam tram's carriage. During her training at the police academy, her instructor had said that Eve was an excellent detective, just not very physically fit. But now was different. With all kinds of transportation everywhere, detectives no longer had to run themselves to death to catch someone. If she could see her instructor again, Eve would definitely have a good talk with him about this. Of course, right now, she first had to stop this damn steam tram. Stop it! Eve raised her pistol and aimed it at Lorenzo in the driver's cabin. The distance between them wasn't far. Despite the roaring of the machine, her voice reached him clearly. But Lorenzo didn't stop. Instead, he turned his head with a friendly look. "I'm not your enemy, detective." "They are." Eve knew Lorenzo was referring to the fleeing group, but she remained vigilant and refused to lower her gun. "I'm a detective, a private detective. A detective with a shotgun? Most of my colleagues carry guns. Mine is just a bit special. You can think of me as a minority. Do you have any idea how much of a commotion you've caused? I have the authority to shoot you right now." The last part was a bluff. Eve wasn't actually sure under what circumstances she could shoot. This was something she was supposed to learn through practice under Press's guidance. Such a big commotion? Let's just say it's my personal style. I'm more of a man of action than one who stands around and broods. Lorenzo was good at labeling himself. A small label could make people imagine a lot. This was something his chief teacher at the Royal Academy of Arts had taught him. Without giving Eve time to think, Lorenzo quickly changed the subject. "Detective, did you know this thing can go much faster?" He pointed to the iron contraption under their feet, as calm as if he didn't see the gun muzzle. All technology in human history is first used for military purposes before it gradually becomes civilian. For example, the Zeppelins that are being prepared to join the Midgard Serpent system in recent years. They were originally military airships. Ground artillery couldn't reach their altitude. They would use the cover of the clouds to deploy troops and conduct air raids. Even the Midgard Serpent was initially a military system. The goal was that with a single order from the Queen, we could plunge the continent across the sea into a sea of fire. Wherever the railway went, steam trains could deliver Inverwig soldiers to the battlefield at any time. The steam tram under our feet is the same. It was born during Old Dunling's worst period of public order. He placed his hand on the control lever and slowly stood up. He left the shotgun on the control panel. To prove to Eve that he was not a threat, he even raised his other empty hand. This thing called the Iron Serpent was originally a real iron serpent. The seats inside were filled with fully armed soldiers, and the exterior was covered with sturdy armor. Even if it was shot, it would only leave a dent. The Zeppelins in the sky were in command. Wherever there was a riot, the Iron Serpent would go there. The armor would be raised in unison, gun barrels would extend from the openings, and the triggers would be pulled. At that time, Inverwig had just become the world leader in steam technology. Spies and agents from various countries were everywhere, and Old Dunling was in turmoil. Lorenzo swallowed and then said, "What I'm trying to say is the power of this thing is far greater than what's written in its specifications. After all these years, it still uses a Watt-II steam engine. Decades ago, it could carry a carriage full of soldiers and several tons of armor and still run like the wind. Now, it can't even run properly with a few citizens. The mechanics are slacking off. They've limited the power of this thing. It's wearing a civilian coat, but it's actually still a blood-stained weapon. But as long as you know a little about mechanics and the structure of the steam tram, this limitation is easy to break." He felt a sense of foreboding. It was clear that her intuition, which she had always relied on, had not abandoned her this time. As soon as he finished speaking, Lorenzo forcefully pulled down the control lever. At the same time, Eve instinctively pulled the trigger. The bullet left the barrel. The steam tram swayed violently, as if it were about to fall apart. The huge impact threw Eve up, and she slammed heavily against the iron wall. And with the sound of shattering glass, an endless gust of wind rushed in. "Why?" Eve struggled to lift her head. The damn detective was standing steadily in the driver's cabin. Her bullet had missed, only shattering the windshield. She didn't understand where this sudden movement came from. But then she felt it. The entire carriage was shaking violently. This steam tram called the Iron Serpent had broken free of its original limitations. Its speed continued to climb, finally reaching its glorious state. As if to answer Eve's question, Lorenzo pointed to her side amidst the violent jolting. There were several cloth bags hanging on the iron wall. The commute on the steam tram could be long. To help passengers pass the time, they were usually filled with today's newspapers and some other uninteresting books. To facilitate maintenance, the mechanics would put the steam trams operating manual and some publicly available blueprints in them. This was originally intended to educate the public, but it seemed that only Lorenzo ever read these boring books. And today, it all paid off. The sunset in Old Dunling was not beautiful. The sky was gloomy, and endless steam formed a hazy dome that obscured everything. The afterglow of the sun could not penetrate the layers of gloom, leaving only a blurry red tide, like a rain of fire descending upon the world. Zeppelins drifted slowly through the clouds like great whales. From the ground, one could only see their dark silhouettes, as if they had walked out of a myth. Lorenzo sat comfortably in the driver's seat. Since he had changed the steam tram's route, the suspects had disappeared from his sight. "Detective, we can actually cooperate," Lorenzo said, facing the wind without regard for Eve's condition behind him. "Our goal is the same group of people. As long as we catch them, we'll have valuable clues. As for what comes after, we can talk about it later. What do you think?" Eve thought for a moment. Amidst the jolting, she chose to lower her gun. Although they hadn't known each other for long, in this short time, Lorenzo had made a stunning impression on her. She had never seen such a composed person. It was as if everything was under his control, deep and powerful. "So you agree to this proposal now?" Lorenzo's eyes held a mysterious look, as if a secret plot was brewing beneath his gray-blue gaze. Lorenzo Holmes. A name is the first step to trust. Eve hesitantly extended her hand, but just as she was about to say her name, Lorenzo pulled his hand back. "Evio, Arshel, I know your name. How could you?" Eve's heart immediately became guarded again. She began to regret this brief alliance. "I'm a great detective. This sort of thing is simple." Lorenzo's gaze swept over her. A brand minus new uniform, neat attire, clearly a rookie who just reported to the police station. "You should see the state of your colleagues most of the time. They're practically drunkards. Someone like you stands out among them," Lorenzo commented as if appraising an object. "Full of drive, full of passion, hating evil like a personal enemy. You're a typical graduate full of illusions about the world. You love this line of work and are eager to achieve something." Lorenzo shook his head with a troubled look. "Another child misled by embellished news. This line of work isn't as simple as you think. It's not a world where criminals will obediently raise their hands just because you say hands up. The timid ones will turn and run, and the bold ones will shoot you before you even finish speaking." His words were harsh and precise, at least to Eve's ears. But she was also a little angry, as if her secret had been exposed, laid bare under the sun. "You're also a child of nobility. I can tell from your necklace." Lorenzo pointed to Eve's smooth neck. The silver necklace held a thumbnail-sized ruby. It was originally hidden under her clothes, but had fallen out during the violent impact. "This isn't something an ordinary noble can afford. Did you know? The list of new recruits in the police force is usually marked. They give preferential treatment to those nobles to prevent these young masters and mistresses from dying accidentally. You can check when you go back, and this list is easy to get. It's posted on your bulletin board." Lorenzo smiled. In Eve's eyes, he became incredibly mysterious and powerful. "You, how do you know about things at the police station?" Sue Allen Hall was not a place just anyone could enter easily. Eve couldn't figure it out. "My poor nephew died this morning. I can at least file a report, right?" Lorenzo smiled. Whether it was Sue Allen Hall or City Hall, Lorenzo was never afraid to enter because of their names. As long as there was a valid reason, these were places ordinary people could go. There are only a few marked young masters and mistresses, and only one of them is a girl. "I guess that's you, right?" "Evio Arshel." He was completely stunned by Lorenzo's words. Looking at her somewhat frightened expression, Lorenzo was extremely satisfied. Lorenzo Holmes was just a second-rate detective skilled in deception. This was his own assessment of himself. There was no such thing as a super-minus intellect in this world. Even if there was, he shouldn't be a detective but locked up for life by the lunatics at the Mechanicum. A brain that could advance the world's technology tree used to fight crime? That was too much of a waste? The most perfect deception should be combined with truth. He wouldn't tell Eve that her police ID had also fallen out during the impact, with her information at the station recorded in detail. He also wouldn't tell her that to facilitate the Shrike's business in the Undercity, there had long been the Shrike spies in Sue Allen Hall. Any personnel changes would be reported to that terrifying butcher bird at nightfall. A real result combined with cryptic reasoning, this was what Lorenzo had always done. Even if it was full of loopholes, in the face of the real result, they could only believe. It was like a mathematical formula. As long as the derivation was correct, no matter how outrageous the answer, it must be correct. "Can you believe I'm a detective now?" Lorenzo showed his signature smile. Everything was in his grasp. "Where are we going now?" Although they were temporarily on the same side, Eve still didn't let her guard down. "On the way to intercept them. Their destination is the Undercity. There are many routes to get there quickly, but there's only one intersection that allows them to pass through quickly. To manage the chaotic Undercity, Old Dunling's measure was isolation. The two districts were separated by tall buildings and walls, with only a few wide intersections left for easy guarding. Even without going through the intersections, one could still reach the Undercity. For profit, they had long since opened up tunnels between buildings. But now the group was on horseback, and to pass through quickly, they could only go through the intersections. They were not only being chased by Lorenzo, the mounted police from Sue Allen Hall had probably already caught up with them, and a fierce gunfight had broken out along the way. How are you so sure we can catch up? Eve didn't understand. Lorenzo pointed upwards to the route map hanging in the driver's cabin. You should pay more attention to the daily news. For example, the Undercity will also be included in the Iron Serpent's operating range. Lorenzo's habit was to read the newspaper and go to City Hall every week to see if there were any new regulations. He had gotten this habit from a movie in a dream. In that movie, Earth was blown up to build a cosmic highway because they hadn't gone to the Galactic City Hall in time to read the regulations. A story full of dark humor. Alright, forget the old dreams and look at the present. A few months ago, Old Dunling decided to extend the Iron Serpent to the Undercity. Lorenzo speculated that some high-minus level official wanted to make a move on the Undercity, just like a long time ago. As long as the tracks were laid in the Undercity, and the old armored Iron Serpents were put online, Old Dunling could clean up the filth of the Undercity at any time. But unfortunately, the operation failed as soon as it began. The tracks were indeed laid in the Undercity, but not a single Iron Serpent could enter. The Desperados were more united than anyone had imagined. The operation was quickly halted, and the railway line instead became a route for gangs to transport goods. The black market economy boomed, and he remembered the Shrike being ecstatic at the time. Although it failed, the tracks in the Undercity are connected to the Outer City. It's just that no one dares to drive there. With the map in his mind and the route map in the driver's cabin overlapping, Lorenzo could stop them just outside the Undercity. The team moved forward quickly. The unexpected events of this operation far exceeded their imagination. Just as Lorenzo had said, the mounted police from Sue Allen Hall had already caught up with them. The shrill sound of police whistles echoed continuously, like a death knell before the apocalypse. Although the situation was critical, the Undercity was right in front of them. Once they were there, even Sue Allen Hall would find it difficult. Once they were there, this terrible day would be over. In fact, it was already getting dark. Only the red clouds on the horizon were still emitting their last faint glow. This was the gap in Old Dunling's day, when daylight was about to end and night had not yet arrived. A cool wind blew, and the sound of steam whistles echoed back and forth. They were almost there. But just then, a roar sounded. The entire street began to tremble slightly, and then the Iron Serpent burst through the mist. Finally caught up with you. The mist tore apart, and the great detective made a brilliant entrance. Lorenzo stood in the driver's cabin, raised his Winchester, and fired without mercy. The mounted police behind him also opened fire. In their eyes, Lorenzo was also an enemy. After the gunshots, several more bullet holes appeared in the carriage. Almost there, they thought to themselves. But then the Iron Serpent accelerated and appeared behind them. Gunshots and explosions. The scene became chaotic. The sound of violent impacts and the screams of the crowd filled their ears. With warm blood, everything began to tumble. The Iron Serpent had derailed. After the tracks were completed, the first thing the gangs did was to cut off the tracks in the Undercity from the Outer City. The route was indeed direct, but it was broken. The Iron Serpent rolled over, crushing the enemy. In the end, it was like a large pile of scrap iron. A long trail of blood was dragged on the ground, and the people who were not yet dead let out weak moans. Eve's head hurt, and her whole body felt like it was about to fall apart. At the last moment, she was thrown out. Her vision was blurred by the tears that came from the pain. She struggled to her feet and then saw the dark silhouette under the fiery clouds. Lorenzo held a shotgun in one hand and his cane in the other. Not far from the wreckage of the Iron Serpent, he was stepping on a man who was not yet dead. Looks like you're the only one left, friend. The dark muzzle of the gun hung down. No one knew if Lorenzo would suddenly open fire. I won't say anything, the man said calmly, not at all concerned that his death was imminent. Lorenzo smiled. He was best at dealing with these strong mindful people. But just as he was about to say something more, the head under his foot suddenly exploded. He was dead. His smile froze. He looked ahead. Under the old building, a wounded figure gave Lorenzo a hard look, put the still-smoking gun under his coat, and then turned and left. It was the person acting as the insurance policy. He had survived until the end. This time, Lorenzo was really angry, but just as he was about to take a step, he stopped. At this moment, more people emerged from all around him, holding guns and swords, looking menacing. As if suddenly realizing something, Lorenzo turned his head. The bustling city was just 100 meters away. The mounted police stood in a neat row, their guns pointing upwards like an iron curtain separating the noble from the filthy, coldly watching it all. Lorenzo had entered the Undercity. The rolling Iron Serpent had crushed the enemy, but it had also reached the Undercity in the impact. More gang members came out, like a sea of people. Now there was no way out. If he went back, he would be arrested by the mounted police. If he went forward, he would be hacked to death. Just as Lorenzo was at a loss, another gunshot rang out. Eve held the gun with a terrified look. In front of her was a gangster who had been shot down with one shot. Seeming to notice Lorenzo's gaze, she explained in a panic. He touched me first. The situation was a bit awkward. Before Lorenzo could say anything, the dense crowd pressed forward. Where there is light, darkness is born. Before the Undercity appeared, the evils of Old Dunling were scattered in every dark corner. No matter how many soldiers the Iron Serpents carried, no matter how many dead bodies were thrown into the Thames, nothing changed. The steam towers, with the world's most advanced technology, pierced the clouds. The darkest evils fermented in the mist below. Until the appearance of the Undercity, this unvented evil finally had a place to be released. Those dark things all gathered in that filthy place, and the rest of Old Dunling lived in a false sanctity. The Undercity was so special that one couldn't help but feel a sense of mystery. And because of the Undercity's special nature, there were a few unwritten rules in Hall. One of them was that officers were forbidden from entering the Undercity. The desperados there didn't care about their own lives. For a certain amount of wealth, they would kill any officer who rashly entered. The mounted police didn't dare to enter rashly. They were waiting for their next orders. Lorenzo, who was in the middle of it, was not feeling very well. It was clear that these people had come for the suspects. A perfect coordination. No matter how much chaos they caused in the outer city to cover their tracks, as long as they entered the Undercity with so many desperados watching, the mounted police could only let them go. Originally, everyone was just in a standoff. But from the moment Eve killed that gang member, a firefight was imminent. Run! The situation was urgent. Lorenzo could only shout this one word, and then the piercing sound of gunfire rang out. The gang started firing. A motley collection of firearms, mostly homemade. All kinds of projectiles flew everywhere. Eve dived and rolled behind the wreckage of the Iron Serpent. The sound of metal clashing against metal tore at her eardrums. Lorenzo had hidden behind the Iron Serpent before her. He was a man of action. Words always came after actions. What do we do? The young detective was clearly panicked. She couldn't have imagined that her first day on the job would be so exciting. Wait, when I tell you to run, you run, got it? Lorenzo shouted, trying to make his voice clear over the sound of the gunfire. Eve was still useful to him. He couldn't let her die just like that. Pointing to the row of mounted police behind them, Lorenzo shouted to her, run that way. You're a detective today, won't just stand by and watch you die. As long as you cross that line, these thugs won't dare to touch you. This was also one of their rules. People from the Undercity were not allowed to enter the outer city. In the eyes of Old Dunling, they were just a bunch of stowaways. According to the law, all detectives had the right to shoot any thug who entered the outer city without authorization. Chaotic, yet bound by iron laws. The Shrike had settled this. The existence of the Undercity was only because Old Dunling needed it. Old Dunling was a huge, crazy city. It was prosperous and beautiful, but there was always some trash that needed to be dumped. In the past, it was dumped in every corner, but now it was concentrated in the Undercity. A trash can. The Shrike always described the land he ruled this way. There were many secrets hidden in his gray-blue eyes. Lorenzo was a man entangled in mystery. Run, girl. He slapped her on the back. Before he could even feel the girl's softness, Lorenzo stepped out with his shotgun. He pulled the trigger like a starting gun. Eve, without realizing it, began to believe everything Lorenzo said. As he stepped out with his gun, Eve ran backward. Gunfire and police whistles, a new round of chaos began. A bullet pierced a man's skull. The shattered fragments hit several people nearby. Blood splattered everywhere, a brilliant sight. The thugs rushed forward with their homemade weapons, although their orders were only to stop the mounted police's pursuit. Now that someone was dead, they had to make Lorenzo and Eve pay. A rusty blade came slashing down. Lorenzo barely dodged it, and then the Winchester roared, blowing the man's upper body apart. They were not VOL. Their bodies had not undergone that strange transformation. An ordinary body of flesh and blood could not withstand this shot. After all, this weapon was not designed to kill people in the first place. What a familiar and exciting feeling. The unique smell of blood filled the filthy street. It was as if he had been awakened, and he could feel his own blood heating up. The sound of gunfire continued. Lorenzo was never a good person. This was a conclusion he had reached after many nights of contemplation. So he showed no mercy when he acted. A continuous series of whistles sounded. It was the special iron whistle of Hall, which could produce different frequencies of notes. In emergencies, the mounted police mostly used it to communicate, like a simple Morse code. A few different whistle sounds could quickly convey important messages. They were communicating frequently. Lorenzo had spent a long time learning this top-mighty secret communication method. Although he couldn't fully decipher it, he could now barely understand some of the simple commands of the iron whistle. After a series of short, sharp whistles, a long blast sounded. Lorenzo blew the head off the big man in front of him with one shot and then felt a bit of pressure. He understood the whistle. More mounted police were about to arrive. Press gripped the reins, his face full of worry as he rode against the wind. He was following the reinforcements of mounted police, rapidly approaching the Undercity. Press didn't care about any case right now. More important than the case was Eve. Just as Lorenzo had said, Eve was a noble. As a senior detective, Press being ordered to train such a rookie showed Eve's extraordinary status. Eve could not die. If she died, those damn nobles would skin him alive. Of course, Press had an even bigger worry in his heart about Lorenzo. He always felt that he had seen this damn detective somewhere before. After thinking hard, a familiar figure gradually appeared in his mind. Just the thought of it sent a chill down his spine. Press wasn't sure of his deduction, but he couldn't deceive himself either. His rifle was loaded and hanging on the side, and a fully loaded revolver was stuck in his belt. He felt like he was about to go to war. After all, he might be facing one of the monstrosities of the Undercity. No amount of preparation would be enough. Even now, Press still felt that it was the most vicious case he had ever experienced. In the mist, blood soaked the ground, and bodies and blood filled the Thames. Press would never forget that figure, one of the main figures in the Red River Massacre, the Shrike Siren Thorn. His rough hands slowly picked up the rifle. He could already see the blockade of mounted police in the distance. Press knew he was almost there. So he put the iron whistle to his lips, and a long, clear blast pierced the red evening glow. With the sound of the iron whistle, the mounted police who had been watching coldly all raised their guns. The dark muzzles formed a wall of death. The sound of bullets roaring filled her ears. Eve hadn't looked back since she started running. She didn't know why she believed Lorenzo, but as if following an instinct, she obeyed and had survived until now. The afterglow of the setting sun cast a layer of tragic red over everything. Eve couldn't see the faces of the mounted police. They had their backs to the afterglow like dark silhouettes. After the iron whistle, the guns fired in unison. For a moment, Eve thought she was going to die, but the bullets flew past her towards the center of the chaos. Then, the mounted police began to advance. The tall war horses galloped past her towards that filthy place. Eve, suddenly someone called her name. A dark shadow ran through the afterglow and came to her side. Officer Press. Seeing the familiar face, Eve finally breathed a sigh of relief. But then she realized something was wrong. With so much happening, she would definitely be reprimanded. Fall back. This is not a place you can be involved in now. Press's face was grim. He held his rifle. Although he was talking to Eve, his eyes were always on the front, staring intently. Eve wanted to say something, but Press immediately interrupted her. That person might be the Iron Thorn. It's not something a rookie like you can get involved in. Get out of the way. Iron Thorn? It was as if something had been triggered. Eve seemed to remember this term, but she couldn't recall what it was at the moment. Then, Press moved past her, raised his rifle, and fire burst from the muzzle. No matter how violent the thugs were, they were no match for the firepower of the regular army. The battle lasted for a short time and then ended. The entire area was cleared, and the arrested thugs were all tied up on the side. This incident had a much greater impact than anyone had imagined. Victoria Central Hospital had suffered a fire, a steam tram had derailed, and then there was a firefight. Night had fallen. A huge zeppelin moved in the sky, casting down a light to illuminate this dark area. Press sat on his horse, gripping his gun, his eyes sweeping back and forth among the arrested thugs. Did you find him? Another mounted policeman slowly approached and said to Press, No, Chief Donna's. There was a hint of disappointment and self-minus blame in Press's eyes. I'm sorry for mobilizing so many police just because of my hunch. It's alright. It's normal to mobilize police for such a big firefight. It's just a pity we thought we could catch the Iron Thorn, Chief Donna said slowly. But Press, according to our intelligence, the Iron Thorn disappeared after the Red River Massacre. Some say he died in that incident, but we never found his body. Others say he was sent out of Inverwig by the Shrike. He's still here. I've always had a feeling. Press was resolute in response to the Chief's question. After a moment of silence, the Chief still expressed his trust in Press's feeling. Then why did he appear this time? Chief Thomas was a bit confused. For so many years, the Red River Massacre had been a dark cloud over Sue Allenhall, obscuring their so-minus called honor. Sue Allenhall had never given up tracking the Iron Thorn, but they had found nothing. He was about to be forgotten, but now he was back. I don't know, Chief, but I've always had this feeling. The usual lazy feeling was gone. Press had never been so serious. He's been an Old Dunling G all along. He's just too cunning. Even if he passed right in front of us, no one would have noticed.